the United States has announced that it will be taking in 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. So this is from the New York Times, and underneath it says, with European nations under stress from 3 million new refugees, the US said it would substantially increase admissions of people fleeing Russia's invasion. So again, as you guys know, the number of people who have fled Ukraine in the last month, it's over 3 million. 2 million of them are in Poland, in neighboring Poland. And the United States says it's going to take in 100,000 people now. Let me show you something else, which, again, you might not have seen, what's happening in France. And basically the same thing, right? Let me play this quickly. I'll translate.
Notre premier sujet est bien sûr celui de l'accueil et de l'hébergement de ces personnes. Je voudrais souligner le formidable élan de solidarité et de générosité des Français eux-mêmes, puisque 91 000 places d'hébergement particulier ont été proposées à ce jour. D'ores et déjà, nous venons cet après-midi d'adopter, sous l'impulsion de Gérald Darmanin, de Marlène Schiappa et d'Emmanuel Vargon, ministre délégué en charge du logement.
So basically, they're saying the same thing, that they are going to start taking in 100,000 refugees from Ukraine. They've got 100,000 places, 100,000 spots, and this is incredible. The responses to these tweets, perfectly encapsulate what I'm trying to say. Someone quote tweeted this and says, "Tu vois quand tu veux," which basically translates to, see what happens when you actually want to do something. Because what we've been hearing the whole time from the British and from the French, you know how they demonize refugees that are crossing the Mediterranean and then the Channel, letting them drown, telling them that, they're basically going to keep them in these camps like the jungle in Calais. I mean, you cannot deny that they've been treating them horribly. And again, I'm sorry, but I'm not buying this garbage that, they're not refugees because they should have stopped in the first safe country if they were really refugees. That is not a law. You made that up. That the Refugee Convention, 1951, says literally nothing about stopping in the first country. You're assuming that every country is a member of the Refugee Convention or signatory, and you're also assuming they have the infrastructure. That's in addition to the fact that that's not a law. On top of that, you are seriously going to sit there and tell me that the French and the British, having colonized all these African countries and the Middle East and plundered their resources, enslaved their people, who came there without an invitation. They disembarked, with weapons and took control of the place and killed people and enslaved them. And then you want to now complain about, refugees on our shores. Really? What about British and French on their shores for hundreds of fucking years? You seriously going to sit there and tell me that doesn't have an effect on the economic, the imbalance in wealth? I mean, what are you smoking? Why do you think those countries, the former colonial powers, are rich and all the countries they colonized are not rich? You think that's just a magical coincidence? But that happened 300 years ago. No, bitch. The consequences of that are still alive today. It's not that long ago. When the British and the French carved up the Middle East, Sykes-Picot, that's barely 100 years ago. Our grandmothers are older than Israel, another colonial project. You're going to sit there and tell me that, that was long ago? Eat shit. I'm not tolerating that. So don't give me this, but these ones are migrants and these are economic migrants. Like, they say these guys are not refugees. They're just searching for a better life. Like, as if that's a crime. Like, how dare you be happy? Look how demented their arguments are. They're so just completely, they lack any compassion. They're so, and then the irony is they says, these immigrants are Muslims and, we're Christian. Wow, you sound really Christian. Wow, very Christian of you, right? Just like turning people away and treating them like dirt. And so going back to my point, these countries, the colonial powers like Britain, like France, and of course the United States, the extension of the British Empire, they cause all of these wars, the hundreds of years of slavery and colonialism, and then they take a drop of the refugees that they created. Make no mistake, what's happening in Ukraine, this is a NATO manufactured crisis. I don't care what MSNBC tells you. I don't give a shit. It's not about the Nazis. That just makes things worse, the Nazis in Ukraine. It's not about all of the other things. The crux of the issue is NATO expansion. Even if there were zero Nazis in Ukraine, we would still be in this situation today because NATO has been prodding the Russians. And so NATO creates these refugees, and then they're like, yeah, we'll take a few of them. A few of them? Their homes have been destroyed because you provoked the Russians. And you're going to take a few of them? And it's the same thing with Syria, right? The UK bombs Syria, destroys the infrastructure, tries to take out the government, creates a Wild West, lets Al-Qaeda run wild, helps finance these groups. The US does the same thing. And then, yeah, we'll take like 10 refugees. Motherfucker. I mean, this is so disgusting. It's so disgusting. And just to show you the difference, Syria has nowhere near the same amount of money or infrastructure or wealth as the United States or European countries. And when the Iraq War started, which again was the British and the Americans and the coalition of the willing, Syria took in over 1 million Iraqi refugees. Turkey right now has 2 million plus Syrian refugees. Lebanon, Jordan, all of these countries that don't have the resources, that don't have the infrastructure that Europe has, that the West has, take in more refugees for things that they did not create. It's not about just taking in the refugees and the strain that has. It's also the war in Syria affects Lebanon next door because their economies are interlinked. So even if there were no refugees, which there always would be as a consequence of war, but even if there were no refugees, you would still, the neighboring countries also suffer from that. And on top of that, they have to bear the brunt, the strain of taking in the refugees, and it's nothing but thanks, of course. I think it's admirable that they do this because Syria, for example, Syria took in Kurdish refugees, Armenian refugees after the genocide, Palestinians after the expulsion, the Nakba from Palestine by the Israelis. Many people in Syria came as refugees because of being displaced by, war and genocide. And, ahlan wa sahlan, like Syria, that's what Syria does. Syria always has its doors open, always. Other countries, not so much. Take a look at this. April 2018, the United States has only admitted 11 Syrian refugees. 11. Honestly, even if they admitted every single Syrian refugee, it wouldn't be enough. Because I don't want the war in the first place. I don't want refugees in the first place. Do you understand? What I would prefer is not to have that situation, not to have refugees created at all. This doesn't... So even if they did do that, it doesn't make up for it. But this is just adding insult to injury. 11 Syrian refugees. This is after the CIA spent $1 billion trying to destroy Syria, trying to overthrow the government. And of course, again, there's, Assad is a dictator. Look, man, I don't give a shit what you think of Assad. When you remove people like Assad and Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi, you get Al-Qaeda. So do you want Al-Qaeda? You want head-chopping fucking lunatics that are backed by NATO? Or do you want a stable, secular government? Any rational person can pick between those things. Don't come here and tell me that Assad is worse than these lunatics that are backed by NATO and Saudi Arabia. Screw you. I'm not tolerating that. Kulu khara. This is absolutely obscene. And the West creates these refugees. They create these crises. Then they don't even take a speck of refugees. And that's the same thing with Ukraine. 100,000. There are 3 million refugees. What's 100,000? But even then, it's already better than how many Syrian refugees they took in. Huh? My goodness. It's so disgusting. And we see this overt racism from those news hosts, right? Those anchors who are on TV like, but these are Christians. And, the Ukrainians, they're white and they have blonde hair and blue eyes and they're civilized. Go screw yourself. You're an idiot. There's nothing in the refugee convention about what color hair you have or what religion you are. And if you knew anything about Christianity, you would know what Syria is. Of course, the United States, what do they do also on the border? They have all these people that have come from Central America, from Latin America, whose countries they destabilized with the Monroe Doctrine because the United States wants to feel safe, right? Remember, it's okay for the United States to coup every country in its surrounding, in its vicinity, right, in the Western Hemisphere, so it can guarantee its security. But dare Russia go in the same direction? Russia is not even trying to do the same thing as the Monroe Doctrine. NATO is just flat out threatening Russia. I mean, that's not even something new. It's, they've been saying this for 30 years. I really don't know why this is controversial. This is don't talk about geopolitics if you don't want to talk about geopolitics, But in any case, do you see how all these countries in Latin America, Central America, the United States overthrew their governments, democratically elected governments, in Bolivia, in Nicaragua, in Chile, everywhere. They've tried to destabilize these countries one way or another. And then you have decades and decades of stunted growth, of stunted economic development, of instability, which adds up, piles up, and then people want to leave. And then they treat them like cattle. Not that you should be treating cattle that way, but, as the phrase goes, they treat them like they're not human. They treat them like dirt. It's horrible, right? And, of course, for Ukrainians, let's take them all in all of a sudden. Great. But why don't you do that for everyone? Why don't you extend the same courtesy for everyone? I can't help but notice a double standard.